So I want to share one of my favorite CFW stories with you from when I was a student at UW-Stevens Point. And one of our traditions in our chapter was the back and forth pranking between the guys and the girls. And so one year we decided we were going to sneak out of the large group early and we were going to go do various things to the guys' cabin. So we had balloons and we had toilet paper and all sorts of, your traditional pranking stuff. And so we go to their cabin and we decorate it for them. And then we went to hide so we could see the reaction because that's most of the fun, right? And so we're hiding out behind the bathrooms. And the guys come out of large group and they're coming down the trail. And, we're just so giddy with excitement. And they come up to the cabin that we spent so long decorating. And then they were like, oh, man, this really stinks for someone. And then they walk by and go to their cabin. So we had thought we were super stealthy, right? And when you check in and you look where people are staying. And so we had a spy go and look up some of the guys' names and evidently was a little bit off in her numbers. So we decorated cabin number 9, and they were staying in cabin number 8. So they got a nice surprise. Because after that, we thought, okay, do we quick try to get everything off or do we run? And we ran. So that is my CFW story. And that's a funny story, but one of the things that I most remember about CFW is how God met me there year after year. When you set aside that time, like Joe shared, for a whole week, God really can use that in your life. So if you're on the fence, I would highly recommend jumping over and going. So it's awesome. All right, I want you to turn to your neighbor, and if you could prescribe your best life, what would it look like? Prescribe. So you get to determine what it looks like, what happens, what's involved in it, how it ends. Anything you could want to have your best life possible, what would be in it? Turn to your neighbor and tell them. All right, let's come back together. And a couple of you just shout out, what are some things that would be in your best life? Just shout them out, something you would really want to be there. Friends, elephants. Yeah. Bacon, lots and lots of bacon. Food, spinach. Who said that? All right. Way to go. Cool. Well, tonight we are going to look at Hebrews 11 and some best lives lived by faith. And so we're going to take what we would describe as our best life, and we're going to look at their best lives. And then at the end, we're going to do a little bit comparison. So let me pray for us, and then we'll get going. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for tonight and the ways that you have been at work in our lives this week. We just come before you and look forward to the ways that you are going to meet us tonight, the ways that you are going to encourage us through your word to us. So God, would you come and have your way with us? I pray these things in your name. Amen. All right, so a little bit more about myself. There's a picture of my family. There we are. So that is my husband, Chad. We have been married for just over 10 years. We met at UW-Stevens Point. We were both undergrads in the chapter there. And we met and got married just a little bit after we graduated. We have a 6-year-old daughter named Hannah. There she is. She's in kindergarten. And then we have a 1-year-old named Jack. So this was taken last weekend. We went exploring. We recently moved to the Madison area from Milwaukee, and we were exploring our new area. And we found this little farm where we went geocaching. Any geocachers out there? Oh, man, we love it. That's kind of our family weekend activity. Jack was not loving it so much, as you can tell from this picture. He was a little put off by it. But that's my family. I've been on staff for 11 years with InterVarsity. I staffed UW-Milwaukee and Marquette University, and I'm now the area director for South Central Wisconsin. And so I oversee 11 campuses. Not all of them have chapters yet in the South Central Wisconsin area. So that's a little bit about me. So I know you guys have been studying Hebrews. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a refresher of the background of Hebrews. But Hebrews was written to Jewish Christians like us who had never met Jesus. And after initial progress in their faith, they got discouraged and hard things were happening. And they realized, hey, actually when we were Jewish, we had more cultural advantages. And so they were starting to make decisions that weren't helping them in their faith. They were starting to be persecuted. And so Paul is writing to them in the book of Hebrews to encourage them and to say, press on, it's worth it. And I think this chapter is really applicable to where we are in the semester because it's probably been a long year and a long semester and you're nearing the end. And so there's encouragement for us in chapter 11 that I am excited to share that I think we all need to hear as well. So tonight we're going to look at 3 sections in Hebrews 11. So if you have a Bible or a smartphone or a tablet or an iPad or an iPhone, you can pull it out and turn to Hebrews 11. And the 3 sections that we're going to look at, first is 1 through 3. We're going to learn about some definition of what faith looks like, and we're going to contrast that with what faith doesn't look like. And then in verses 4 through 37, we're going to look at some best lives lived by faith and some examples for us to be encouraged by. And then lastly, we're going to end with Jesus in mind. So section 1, we learn 2 things about faith in this section. And the first one is that the Hebrews gives us a definition of faith. And that is, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Confidence and assurance are 2 pretty strong words. And when I was thinking about, okay, what am I confident about in my own life? I thought of some things like, I am pretty confident I'm going to have coffee tomorrow. That's something that I am pretty sure is going to happen. I'm probably going to have multiple cups of coffee tomorrow. But the list that I came up with was actually not that long. There's not a whole lot of things that are certain and that I am sure are going to happen. And the second thing that we learn about faith in this first section is we're going to contrast that to not having any faith. And in verse 5, we see what a life without faith looks like. And it says that it is impossible, without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. We all live by faith, even though my list was pretty short of the things that I was confident in sharing. We all live by faith, and we put our faith in a lot of different things, whether we realize it or not, such as the chairs that you're sitting in. You sat in them. You had faith that they weren't going to fall. You get in your car and you drive somewhere, and you have faith that, that it probably will get you where you're going, depending on your car. And we put our faith in good things, such as our academics and our studies and our families. And one of the ways that we know where we put our faith is where we spend our time and our resources. So I grew up in a Christian home, and I went to UW-Stevens Point. And as a freshman, I went to cross-training. Any cross-training alum out there? Who's been to cross-training? Fall conference. Who's been to fall conference? Yes. And I took the on-campus, on-purpose track. Any on-campus, on-purpose alumni out there? Okay. Jay Anderson was the one who was leading the track at the time. And he was talking about how you can tell who is Lord of your life by where you spend your time and your resources. And one really good way to figure that out, where your faith is, who's the Lord of your life, is to look at your checkbook. And so I got out my checkbook, and I looked down the register of where I spent my money. And almost every other check, this is in the day when you had checks, I spent at New York & Company. Anybody familiar with New York & Company? It's a women's clothing store. And I had no idea how much money I totaled up over the past 3 months, how much money I had spent at New York & Company, and I was absolutely devastated. It was a lot of money. And so one of the things that I was convicted of was that I was not going to buy clothes for a year. And I was going to take that money, and I was going to do something that reflected where my faith really was. And so at first it seemed easy. I went for quite a while without really missing what the clothes that I had been buying. I worked at New York & Company at the time as well. Until one day, we got this load of new coats in, and they were on sale. And there was this super cute coat, right, that was on super sale, and I bought it because I was so excited that I had totally forgotten what I had committed to. And so I hid it in the bag, and I was on my way out to the car, and I sat down on my car, and I was like, oh no. And I still remember that moment of wrestling with God. Like, God, did you really mean not to give up all clothes for all year? Like, I don't think you meant this particular coat, because this particular coat is really cute, and it was really cheap. And I haven't bought anything in so long. But I knew that if I gave in here, it would be easy to do it again and again and again. And I wanted where my faith was to be reflected in how I spent my money and my time. And so I took it back. And, they always ask, oh, why are you returning this? And all I could say was, because. Just take it back. I have no good reason. Because. But it's a challenge for all of us. So as we are looking at what are we confident of, what are we sure of, where is our faith, one way that we can really understand where our heart is to say, okay, where am I spending my time and my resources? Because that's where my confidence is. All right, so section number 2. Let's look at that section and see where a host of others have put their faith. So I have a chart up here. Yes, this was really fun to make. So we have, if you look through this section from verses 4 through 37, you get a whole host of names. And there's actually a section with more names, but I just kind of hit the key players that are mentioned here. And so I have their name. I have what faith enables them to do. And then the response. that their faith gets. So we have Abel, and his faith enabled him to be obedient and have the ability to still speak. And the response to his faith was to be commended as righteous. We have Enoch. Faith enabled him to have a ride to heaven and not experience death. And he was commended as one who pleased God. We have Noah, whose faith enabled him to be obedient, even though what God asked him to do really seemed kind of crazy. To build this huge boat when there was no rain on the horizon, and everyone mocked him. Faith enabled him to be obedient, and he became an heir of righteousness. We have Abraham. Faith enabled him to bear fruit and to have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. We have Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, who trusted God for their future, and they were commended for their faith. Moses' parents, who hid him, they were not afraid. The Israelites passed through the Red Sea, salvation from the Egyptians. Rahab welcomed the spies by faith and found salvation. So I'm going to summarize my chart into 3 things that we can learn from these people. Number 1 is that God allows difficult circumstances. Number 2 is that we need to trust in God's purposes. And number 3, we need to obey God's instructions. So number 1, God allows difficult circumstances. Well, we saw the Israelites were able to cross the Red Sea. How did they get to the Red Sea? God brought them there. How did the Israelites get to Jericho? God brought them there. When I came on staff, my husband and I got married. I came on staff, and we moved to Milwaukee all around the same time. So my husband didn't have a job, and I was raising support full-time. And we moved to Milwaukee, and we had a little bit of money in the bank, which we used to put down for an apartment. So we had an apartment, we had a place to live. And then we realized we also need to eat. And we don't have any money. And my husband and I, mostly my husband's a little bit more stable than I am, but I was like, oh my gosh, we made a mistake. Like we shouldn't have come on staff. We shouldn't have moved to Milwaukee. We must have heard God wrong. We have no money, and we're going to starve. And Chad said, I don't think that's true. And so he encouraged me to call a mentor from my home church in Antigo, Wisconsin, and talk to her about the things that I was going through. And this was probably 12 years ago, and I will never forget what she said to me, and I will never forget the passage that she pointed me to. But she said, Jen, remember when Jesus called the disciples out on the boat and the storm came? That doesn't make them any less called onto the boat. And so even if things are hard and you don't have any money now, which, by the way, we did get money and we did eat, but that doesn't change. God called us to Milwaukee. God called me to staff. And even though it was hard, that didn't change the fact that he had called me. And so we see the same things here, is that God allows difficult circumstances so that he can be glorified. And we see that in these best lives lived by faith. Paul here are using this example to encourage the Hebrew Christians. Because remember, they're kind of starting to have a hard time. Persecution is starting to come. And he wants to point that out as an encouragement as well. That throughout the generations, God allows difficult circumstances for his glory, but he is still at work. And that was a reminder for them to press on as well. And I think I have my stories of needing that encouragement, and I'm sure you do as well. You have rivers in your life that need crossing, and you have walls like the walls of Jericho that need tumbling. And you need encouragement that God allows these for his glory and to have faith in those things that are unseen. God specializes in situations that look impossible, and he will make a way. And at the end of this chapter, he's going to give us a glimpse and a promise of how he does that. But I have another story of that as well. So we have Hannah. Hannah was a wonderful gift. And then we enjoyed Hannah so much, we thought, oh, we'll have a second child as well. But we weren't able to get pregnant. And so we tried for years after years after years, and we went to doctor after doctor after doctor, and we tried procedure after procedure after procedure. And we were told that we couldn't have any more. There was nothing more that we could do. And so we gave it to God, and we said, this is not the life that we would, if we were prescribing our best life like you do, this is not how it would have ended. This would have not been a part of our story. But we're going to receive from you the life that you have. And so I was like, okay, moving forward, we had given it to God. I had cleaned out the attic with all of our baby stuff, and I had given it away, and I got pregnant that next month. And it took me so long to realize I was pregnant. I thought, man, this is the longest flu ever. Like, when is this going to end? But God made a way. And so another encouraging story of how God works in impossible circumstances, that he brings things into our life to work through them for the glory of God. Number 2, trust in God's purposes. In verses 20 through 22, we have the stories of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And what these three have in common is that they did not know how their stories were going to end. So we have Jacob, who at the end of his life, he knew that Joseph was alive, but there were still a lot of unknowns about how his life was going to end and how life was going to end for his family. Would the famine end? Would they go back home, right? But we see that he leaned on his staff and he worshiped. And Joseph spoke about what God had done, and that was enough for him. They trusted God with the rest. And we need to do the same with those circumstances, those rivers in your life right now that need crossing, and those walls of Jericho that need tumbling. One of the things we see from these best lives lived by faith is that they trust in God's purposes. And lastly, number 3, one of the things we see about their best lives lived by faith is that they obey God's instructions. I can only imagine if I was one of the Israelites and I was told to march continuously around the walls of Jericho and to blow my horns, and then the next day I was told to do it again, and the next day I was told to do it again, and the next day I was told to do it again, right? You would see, you would start questioning why you were doing this. And so it's by faith in the things that they didn't see that they did this. And they obeyed what God asked them to do. Faith and obedience are two sides of the same coin. And so in those times, when you have impossible situations and you are trusting God, you know, you have your prescription here of what a best life lived by faith would do, and that would be to continue to obey, to do the things that you know God has asked you to do, to read his word, to worship him, to witness to those around you, to give and to serve, and to wait because you are sure of the things that he is going to do. It is not futile to obey God because of Jesus. Which brings me to our last section in Hebrews 11 in verses 39 and 40. So those verses say, these were all commended. All of these people were commended for their faith. Yet none of them received what they had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. When I read that, I thought that was really cool to think of how God, way back then, when all of these people were living, had thought of the Hebrews. And then it was even cooler to think that's us too, that all that time ago, God was thinking of us. And then I got even more excited. And I was like, you know what? He is thinking, you guys just celebrated your 50th anniversary of your chapter, right? So not only was he thinking of the Hebrews not only was he thinking about us here in this room now, he was thinking in the students who are going to be sitting in your seat 50 years from now, who are still learning about who Jesus is. Because that is how big and great God is. That his faith and his plans and his purposes rolled up with all those people on our list. And it's rolled up in us, and it's rolled up in the people to come. So I bet when you shared your best life story, you didn't have a whole lot of time to share, but it probably would have had a happy ending, right? Because there's really no point in describing your best life of everything you'd ever want and then a twist ending. Anyone seen The Croods? Okay, so that's a favorite at our house right now. So if you haven't seen it, The Croods is an animated movie about a cave family. And the father of the caveman family tells a story to his children every night. And it always ends the same way with death, right? So he's trying to teach them, don't do anything new. Don't go out at night, because he's trying to keep them alive. And so he'll tell this story, about a girl who explored this cliff, but she got curious and went a little too far and died. And so then he always puts this red hand mark on the wall. And so they meet another person who's an adventurer, and he's hearing the dad's story for the first time about, this girl that gets curious and died. And he goes, twist, ending. I did not see that coming. And so anyway, I totally lost where I was going with this. But anyways, right, so my guess is that your best lives lived by faith had a happy ending, right? Right. Yes. And that is what we find here at the end of Hebrews 11. A best life lived by faith is complete with a happy ending. All those people, the aforementioned host of believers, lived a better life than they could have imagined because the purposes of God are worked out in their life. And so they didn't know how their life was going to end. Jacob, Joseph, Isaac, all of them. But we see here in these last verses of Hebrews that God has everything worked out for his purposes. And so that they may have not known it, just like you don't know, but they had a happy ending coming for them. Jesus made that possible for them, and Jesus makes that possible for us. So there are a lot of things as we wrap up our time together tonight that we could zoom in on. We could talk about who these people were and what that means for us. Because if we really think about who they were, it's not about them, but it points us to Jesus, right? So we have the birthright stealer, we have the prostitute, we have me. Who are we that Jesus uses us? But that's the awesome thing about who he is and a life lived by faith, is that it doesn't matter because God's purposes are being worked out through them and through us. And that's a pretty encouraging thought. Jesus lived the greatest life by faith that ever was. He did all of those things we talked about. He lived his life by faith. He trusted his Father and obeyed him. And God had us in mind with these men and women who lived out their faith. And he has future generations of InterVarsity students. And you may have impossible circumstances in your life right now that make it hard to trust God and obey God, but he has a plan. And we can look back, as Paul is encouraging the Hebrews to do, and see God's purposes worked out in that whole list of people. And now we can look back to the Hebrews and look how God expanded the church through their lives. And we can see, and then we can say, you know what? 50 years from now, the students who are sitting here What are they going to say about you who came before them? Because we'll have that wonderful opportunity that we can look back and see what God was doing. A lot was accomplished by faith in this chapter, and that can be an encouragement to you as well. You may think that you can never plant a new Whitcomb on your campus, or you may think you can never take a risk because it is just that scary. But you can through faith in Jesus, because you know the ending to the story, that God is going to work out his purposes and bring about that. And so you can act boldly on campus as you step out in faith, because it's about faith in Jesus, not faith in ourselves, that leads to those things. I was a Whitcomb leader at UW-Stevens Point, and I was asked to be a Whitcomb leader my sophomore year, and I led the worst Whitcomb that ever was. It was terrible, and it was terrible. There were 3 of us who got together every week, and I hardly talked to anyone when they came into my dorm room, and I opened up my John question and answer book, and I just read questions off of the page and asked them. It was pretty bad. And so I don't know why, but the following year, I was asked to lead another one. And I said, no way, are you kidding? But I really felt that this is what God had asked me to do. And so I prayed, and I felt that God had asked me. I worked at the child care center on campus, and I felt like he asked me to lead a gig there, to launch a Whitcomb in the child care center with all the other students that worked there, and we do it by starting a gig. And I had no faith in me, which was probably good, but I had seen Jesus do some pretty amazing things the semester before, and so I said yes. And so I asked 10 women to come. I expected no one to come, and 12 came. And 6 of them came to know Jesus. And those 6 are still serving God in places all over the world. And I did nothing to make that happen. But I had faith and assurance that God was at work in places I could not see. And I needed to take that risk and be able to say yes to Jesus, to have faith in him, not in my ability, because I was a terrible Whitcomb leader. But I knew that he could do something. And so I had faith. My confidence and my assurance was in him. And all 6 of those women stood up in my wedding. And we have been friends and still are ever since. And so I look back and to see what God can do with a little bit of faith in who Jesus is. So my challenge to you tonight is to trade your best life for his dream for your life. So whatever spinach, bacon, elephants, whatever was involved in your best life, I would ask you tonight, as you have seen generations before you, will you have confidence and assurance in who Jesus is, and you will trade your best life for his best life for you? No matter what you are facing, would you place your trust in him, that you can live a life with purpose and a mission and an ending that you are sure of? No twist ending. You know the ending because you know Jesus. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for your word to us in Hebrews. And I pray that it would settle deep in our hearts, that we would be encouraged by the men and women who have gone before us in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. God, the InterVarsity students from 50 years ago, would we be encouraged by their best lives lived by faith because their faith was in you, Jesus? And would we trade in what we want for our life and say yes to you, to be on mission with you and to see you move in mighty ways? God, would we take those risks for you? God, we love you, and we are so thankful for you and the work that you did for us on the cross. I pray these things in your wonderful name. Amen.